2021 Planning Commission meeting. I'd like to ask for patience as we continue to conduct virtual meetings. There may be slight delays as we transition between speakers, presentations, and participants. If any participants have issues with the technology, please send a message to the moderator, Ray. We have 4 discussion items on our agenda today. They're all listed under new business, and we will hear full staff and applicant presentations. I would like to ask the commissioners to hold all questions until the conclusion of all presentations and any public comments. Finally, please be recognized by the chairperson before speaking. We start every meeting with an opportunity for the public to comment on any item not related to an agenda item. No one has signed up for public comment today. Let us begin with the consent agenda, which is a list of requests that can be acted upon in one motion. There are 7 items on the consent agenda. 6 of these items appear on the consent agenda to begin the review period. Each of these items will return on a future agenda to be discussed. A text change appears on the consent agenda for the purpose of referral to Committee of the Whole. With that, I would like to ask for a motion to approve the items on the consent agenda.
I'll make a motion.
Excellent. We have a motion by Commissioner O'Haver, and it looks like a second from Commissioner Miller. Excellent. With that, because this is not a final vote, I will ask for a show of hands from all who support the motion. Okay, and we have a unanimous motion passing. Now we will begin new business portion of the agenda. These are requests that have not appeared on a previous Planning Commission agenda. There are 4 rezoning requests for discussion. The first item is D.1, case number Z5720. This is a request to rezone approximately 1.25 acres of land at the southeast corner of Glenwood Avenue and Rembert Drive from residential 4 with the Neighborhood Conservation Overlay District to office mixed use 3 stories, parking limited, conditional use. I'd like to ask for a staff presentation from Hannah Reckow.
Good morning, Planning Commission. So as the Chair mentioned, this is rezoning request Z5720, request to rezone 1.25 acres from R4 with NCOD to OX3 PLCU. The deadline for Planning Commission action is April 22nd, or 26th rather. Next slide. So the rezoning site is located at the intersection of Rembert Drive and Glenwood Avenue. This is sort of the intersection of 2 distinct contexts. One is along Glenwood Avenue, where there's a mix of uses and mainly mixed use zoning, including CX and OX districts. And the other context is the residential neighborhood along Rembert Drive, which has residential zoning and a neighborhood conservation overlay district. And specifically, this is the Brookhaven South NCOD. Next slide. So this shows the aerial view of the surrounding context. This is northwest Raleigh along Route 70, Glenwood Avenue. The Brookhaven neighborhood, again, is to the north and east of the site, so it's low density residential. And then there's commercial and office uses existing along this portion of Glenwood Avenue, and some apartment residential uses elsewhere along Glenwood Avenue. Next slide. So a close-up view of the aerial. You're going to see to the west and north where the commercial and office uses existing intersect with the neighborhood along Rembert Drive. There's a light at the intersection with Rembert Drive. Next slide will show some photos of the site. The top 2 are from Glenwood Avenue, and the bottom 2 are from Rembert Drive. There's currently no house on the site, and the site is partially forested. Next slide. So the request is for a conditional use district. There are 4 proposed zoning conditions. One that limits the permitted uses to the list you see here. The second caps residential density to 2 units per acre. A third limits building height to either 2.5 stories or 40 feet. And for context, that mimics what the current height is limited to under the NCOD and R4 districts. And then finally, the fourth zoning condition limits the total building size to 15,000 square feet. Next slide. So what's changing with this request? The zoning is currently residential, and with the proposed zoning conditions capping residential density, it wouldn't allow any additional residential units to be permitted. The NCOD that currently applies to the property does include a 50-foot front building setback. Under the request, the overlay would be removed, and a parking limited frontage would be applied, which has a build-to range, front build-to range that has a maximum of 100 feet. And then side and rear setbacks would also change. Overall, note that where the property boundary abuts the residential district, the neighborhood transition yard would be required, and that would put any building at least 50 feet from the property line. The next slide, the last major change would be to permitted uses. So some non-residential uses would be permitted on the site, and those are limited to the uses that are named in condition 1. So that does include office use, but does not include retail. And I'll note that I think a version of these slides that was attached to the presentation, to the agenda, had an error. So for clarity, retail is not among the principal uses permitted under the requested district. And then that final condition is informing the maximum size of any building, so that 15,000 square feet. Next slide. So the site is designated on the future land use map as low density residential, which does not envision non-residential uses. So the request is inconsistent with that recommendation. Approval of this request would amend the map to office and residential mixed use. Next slide. Glenwood Avenue is designated as a transit emphasis corridor on the urban form map. So the parking limited frontage that's part of this request is consistent with that designation, which is looking for sort of a balance between pedestrian friendliness and access by car. Next slide. And the request is consistent overall with the 2030 comprehensive plan. As I mentioned, it is inconsistent with the future land use map, consistent with the urban form map. We go to the next slide, we can see some of the policies that this request is consistent with. They include policy encouraging compact development, policies on appropriate frontage and addressing the design guidelines, policy on low impact office uses being one appropriate use to transition between low density residential areas and higher density and higher intensity commercial areas. And then several policies that speak to compatibility with the surrounding area. Those did consider, both contexts that the site sits at. Go to the next slide. See the inconsistent policies. In addition to the future land use map, the request would also be inconsistent with the policy on conservation of single family neighborhoods. So I believe that concludes the staff presentation. Again, your deadline is April 26th.
Thank you, Ms. Reckow. Next, we will hear from the applicant, Isabel Maddox, here on behalf of the applicant. The applicant and those in support have 10 minutes to speak.
Good morning. I'm Isabel Maddox, P.O. Box 946, Raleigh 27602. I'm here today on behalf of Jean and Dominic Wong, who are also on the line. Also on the call with me are Stuart Rogers of Mazer Consulting, our civil engineer, and Chase Smith of Ramey Kemp, our traffic engineer, as well as property owner Cliff Zinner. Jean and Dominic Wong spent decades in corporate America and have raised 2 children and now want to take what they have learned and develop and operate a 5-star top-level preschool daycare. Research regarding childcare in the area has shown that there are over 10,000 kids 4 and under in a 5-mile radius, but only 20 daycares and not nearly a lot of as many high-quality daycares. If those 20 daycares typically serve 200 students, that's 4,000 spots for 10,000 kids. The Wongs have done a lot of research, and one of the things they found is that daycares work best when they're accessible on major streets, but are in or abut neighborhoods. That means less driving for the family, which translates into savings of time and expense, and something we must encourage to minimize our reliance on cars. Their research has led them to discover 5710 Glenwood, which is in a very commercial area, but also adjacent to the Brookhaven neighborhood. And if we'll go to Exhibit 1, you'll see in the location, you'll see all the many commercial uses and the fact that the actual uses on this corridor are very commercial. We have rooms to go, enterprise rental car, Jiffy Lube, many restaurants, office, apartments. And these, not only are the uses commercial, the zoning is commercial, and we if you go to the future land use map, next map is, is zoning. Go one more, please. Yeah, you can see the zoning, how the commercial zoning and the colors dominates Glenwood Avenue. Interestingly, there was once a red barn structure on the property. The current owner is not sure this property has ever been used exclusively for single-family residential. Initially, it was used as the Brookhaven sales office. Subsequent to that, it was used as a photographer's studio and business, and then it fell into disrepair and became an eyesore. In 2016, at the request of both the city and the neighborhood, the dilapidated structure was torn down and it's been vacant ever since. And the current owner says he has had no interest in developing this property as a single-family residential property. I want to move next to the future land use map. Just showing again, you'll see the corridor is made up of not, except for this area, mostly commercial future land use designations. Next, I'd like to go to the site plan on Exhibit 5. Ingress, you can come in off of Glenwood as you're going north, and you can also, as you're coming south on Glenwood, turn left onto Rembert and enter the property that way. The only egress is on Rembert. We have requested multiple times from NCDOT an egress onto Glenwood, but they have said no, it's a safety issue. We will be providing buffer yards adjacent to the residentially zoned properties. That will include a 6.5-foot masonry wall, a planted buffer, and a 50-foot building separation. Exhibit 6 shows the proposed building, a rendering of the proposed building. You can see it's a fairly low-key residential style building, which we think will be a high-quality building compatible with the neighborhood. We've placed the building as close to the street as possible and parking in the rear in accordance with the city's urban design guidelines and comprehensive plan. Our proposed conditions limit uses, limit height to 40 feet or 2.5 stories, and maximum building size of 15,000 feet. As you may have heard, there has been some neighbor opposition for 3 primary reasons. 1, expected diminution in value of the properties. And 2 is excessive traffic in the neighborhood. And 3, worry about removal of the NCDOT. We'll go to Exhibit 7. We have had an MAI appraiser analyze this property, and he has found that this daycare is consistent with adjoining residential and commercial uses. And because of the buffer and building separations and the fact that a daycare is an amenity to the neighborhood, his conclusion was proposed daycare will not have a negative impact on adjoining or nearby property values and is harmonious with surrounding area. We've also had a TIA performed by Ramey Kemp and Associates, and they have determined that additional traffic from this use will not degrade nearby intersections to unacceptable levels, and that there will be minimal traffic impacts to the neighborhood. And our traffic engineer, Chase Smith, will be speaking about this in just a minute. As to the loss of the NCOD status, first of all, in NCOD, what is it? It's a zoning designation. And just like other zoning designations, it may be changed as areas change and different uses become appropriate. It's not established in perpetuity. This lot is on a major corridor and is appropriate for removal. The NCOD is appropriate for removal since it is on a commercial corridor and not appropriate. The NCOD, this particular one, has 4 requirements. 1, that the minimum lot size is 20,000 square feet. We meet that. 2, the lot width is 100 feet. We meet that. 3, the maximum height is 2.5 stories. We meet that. And 4, the only one we don't meet is a minimum front yard setback of 50 feet. And if we go back to Exhibit 5, which shows the site plan, please. So you see that we have pushed the building closer to Glenwood, and we feel like it's more appropriate to satisfy the city goals of its urban design guidelines of pushing this building close to the street, which also has the added benefit of moving it away from the residential. So the only NCOD condition we don't satisfy is actually a benefit for the neighborhood. We've had 2 neighbors meetings and many emails and correspondence. They complained about the dumpster location. We moved it farther away from the closest residence. They complained about a fence. We changed that to a masonry wall. And traffic is probably one of their biggest issues. And I'd like to turn it over to Chase Smith, our traffic engineer, to comment on traffic a little bit. Chase?
Professional traffic engineer with Ramey Kemp and Associates. We prepared a TIA for the proposed daycare located at 5710 Glenwood Avenue. The TIA was initially scoped alongside the City of Raleigh Transportation Department as well as NCDOT. And once we completed the TIA, it was also submitted and approved by both agencies. If you can go to Exhibit 8, should be our trip generation report. Based on information provided by the developer, which is based on existing daycare facilities of similar size and enrollment, the proposed daycare is expected to generate approximately 66 inbound trips and 66 outbound trips during the AM peak hour, and just 67 entering and 67 exiting during the PM peak hour. That equates to a little over 1 car entering and exiting per minute during both the AM peak hour drop-off and PM peak hour pickup periods. If you can skip over to Exhibit 9 now, please. This is just a little bit of info relaying the results that we found in our TIA based on the current operations of the signal at Rembert and Glenwood Avenue. The signal is currently operating at a level of service B, which is an acceptable level of service with the addition of background growth in the area, as well as the addition of the proposed development traffic. The signal is expected to continue operating at a level of service C or better, which again is deemed an acceptable level of service to most review agencies. Based on our study findings, no improvements were recommended at the signal or the 2 driveway locations on Glenwood and Rembert. And as mentioned previously, this finding was approved by both the city and NCDOT. If you skip over to Exhibit 10, please. As Isabel mentioned, the project team has heard of some concerns from the neighbors, mostly around the traffic side of things. The first concern, as we understand it, is that the additional daycare traffic is going to significantly increase delays at the signal, which really isn't the case. On average, we're looking at an overall delay increase at the signal of just over 6 seconds. And for the Rembert Drive, the westbound approach of Rembert Drive, which folks will be using to leave the facility, we're only expecting the delays to increase by just under 12 seconds. As part of our TIA, we run some traffic simulations as well. And based on those simulations, all the folks lined up on the Rembert Drive approach are expected to empty out through each green cycle. The second concern that we've heard of that sort of goes along with that is that traffic, the signal is going to build up and block existing residential driveways on Rembert. And that's not really typically going to be the case either. As you can see on this graphic here, the average queues are not expected to exceed 150 feet, which keeps us inside that first residential driveway. And based on a worst case scenario, you could the maximum queues that we're expected to see might affect 2 to 3 driveways at most. And again, that's a worst case scenario, so not expected to be typical operations. And then the third is that traffic cutting through the neighborhood is going to have a huge impact. And we just don't think that's going to be the case, that we'll even see a lot of traffic cutting through the neighborhood, as they're narrow residential streets with low speed limits, on-street parking. So people are going to get to where they need to go faster if they just head back out to Glenwood Avenue. So
It looks like your time is up. I allowed you to at least finish your thought there. I'd like to, at this point, move on to the neighborhood and those opposed. So personally, I've received over 60 emails on this, and as I understand it, the neighborhood has put together a presentation and they have organized themselves and designated 4 speakers to speak on behalf of the opposition. Without objection, I'd like to allow the group of designated speakers 10 minutes distributed among them. Okay, seeing none, let's proceed.
Good morning, Madam Chairman, members of the Planning Commission. My name is Chad Essick. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Pointer Sproul, 301 Fayetteville Street, Suite 1900. I'm here this morning on behalf of hundreds of homeowners and residents in the Brookhaven neighborhood who are opposed to this rezoning, which is the 3rd attempt to rezone this property to allow commercial uses. We have a signed petition of over 250 residents who are opposed, which I circulated to commission members last week. Many of those folks wanted to speak today, but given the 10-minute time limit, we're trying to be judicious and use our time wisely. I want to outline a few things in my email that I sent to Planning Commission members last week. First, I want to make clear that this property is not property that simply adjoins a residential neighborhood. It's comprised of platted residential lots within the Brookhaven subdivision and the Brookhaven South NCOD, and has its primary frontage and access on Rembert Drive, a neighborhood street used exclusively for residential purposes. I saw the slide that Ms. Maddox showed all the commercial properties along Glenwood Avenue, but none of those have access primarily off a residential street. All of them have access off of Glenwood Avenue. Our engineer, Danny Howe, who lives in Brookhaven, will speak in much more detail about traffic. But what is undisputed is that allowing this to go from residential to commercial uses would add almost 180 additional trips on Rembert Drive during the AM PM peak hours and almost 700 additional trips daily. And the queuing along Rembert Drive, which does not have a protected left turn signal on Glenwood Avenue, would be significant and exacerbate an already existing problem. Finally, it's clear that this proposal is inconsistent with the future land use map, which designates this property as low density residential. That is, of course, no surprise since the property is part of the Brookhaven South NCOD. 3 years ago, staff determined that a virtually identical request to rezone this site to OX3 was inconsistent with the overall comp plan. In our opinion, nothing has materially changed since that determination was made, and this proposal remains inconsistent with the comp plan for the number of reasons I outlined in my email to commission members last week. More specifically, the proposal is inconsistent with the residential character of Brookhaven, does not protect established neighborhoods that the comp plan intends to do, and ignores and then removes the NCOD designation that was put in place precisely to do both. We respectfully ask that the commission recommend denial of Z5720. And with that, I'll turn it over to Danny Howe.
Good morning. My name is Danny Howell. I'm a site civil engineer with Real Engineering, and I live at 6109 Wilkinsburg Road in Brookhaven North. I'm also a board member at Crabtree Swim and Tennis Club across the intersection from the project site at 3305 Fairhill Drive. Thanks for the opportunity to speak in opposition to the request of rezoning. I have been tasked to very quickly discuss traffic and safety concerns associated with this requested rezoning, specifically for a daycare facility use. We have reviewed the traffic impact analysis, the TIA, submitted by the applicant in detail. I sent an email to all commission members with a TIA memo and Exhibit 1, which was a red line TIA by myself, detailing our concerns with the document as provided, and I hope you all take a chance to review the memo and red lines in detail. Slide 3, please. The scope of the TIA only focused on a single existing intersection, i.e. Rembert Drive, Fairhill Drive, /Fairhill Drive, and Glenwood Avenue, US Highway 70, which is one of our 3 gateways into Brookhaven off of Glenwood. Slide 1, please. Sorry, that's not slide 1. Thank you. Slide 4, the method of understanding, which is the MOU or scope of the TIA, should be expanded to include Winthrop Drive /Rembert Drive intersection, the Winthrop Drive Millbrook Road intersection, Moorhead Drive Glenwood Avenue intersection, and Devlin Avenue Glenwood Avenue That's slide 4, please. And this is primarily, again, because the intersections that I just mentioned are shown on blue circles on the exhibit. And this is, again, once traffic realizes the backups at the intersection, there are alternate routes to get you to different accesses on Glenwood and to Milbert Road through the existing Brookhaven subdivision. Can we go back to slide 2, please? Contrary to the TIA, there is no dedicated left turn lane or protected left turn signal from Rembert Drive onto Glenwood Avenue, which will have significant adverse impacts on the residents who live in Brookhaven per the increased traffic generated by the proposed development. Traffic is often queued well beyond the first set of residential driveways on Rembert due to prolonged waits during green lights on Glenwood Avenue to allow the over 80,000 vehicles per day that pass through that intersection. The potential daycare facility traffic leaving the site, approximately 170 trips AM and PM peak and 700 vehicles per day, will all have to exit on Rembert Drive, a neighborhood street, as that's the only exit to the site. The TIA estimates only 15% of trip generation entering and leaving the proposed daycare facility from Rembert Drive internal to the Brookhaven Street network, which currently have no sidewalks and where many families have to walk and ride in the street. We feel these numbers will be much higher due to the following. After one visit attempting to exit on Rembert Drive and turn left onto Glenwood Avenue and waiting and waiting and waiting through the long red light and then trying to make a quick unprotected left turn once light is green, the driver will make an alternate movement the next time, i.e. into Brookhaven to avoid the stoplight. Traffic queuing from the light will also block the proposed full movement side driveway and also force even more cars to turn right into Brookhaven. This is why the number of focus intersections above has to be incorporated into an updated TIA, as these will all be alternate routes to leave the site. For these reasons, we would respectfully ask the Commission request an updated TIA from the applicant, which reflects both accurate existing conditions and known projected future traffic. For these same reasons, among others, that will be discussed by neighbors, we would respectfully ask the Commission recommend denial of Z5720. Thank you.
Good morning. This is Frances Salema. I'm a resident in Brookhaven as well. Thank you for having us. Very quickly, I wanted to reiterate this property is not comparable to other businesses on Glenwood. This isn't a proposed development that's adjacent to or abutting a neighborhood. This lot's truly in Brookhaven on Rembert Drive. As a reminder, this lot has its sole full access point on Rembert Drive, which is truly a neighborhood street. And even though we argue the TIA is flawed, it does acknowledge 700 car trips a day on a purely residential street. While a daycare may be allowed with a special use permit in R4 zoning, conditions would limit this particular daycare to 52 children in R4 zoning, not 188 children. That's 3 times the size of what would be allowed. And initially, the applicant did file a special use permit. And at that time, they proposed to keep the R4 zoning. Myself and another neighbor reached out to the applicant proactively to start a discussion. We do know you value neighborhood to developer communication, and we've truly given the applicant and property owner an opportunity to use this property in a manner respectful of our low density neighborhood. The reality is this property is in Brookhaven on Rembert Drive, and this rezoning is inconsistent, not appropriate, and frankly unsafe for our residents. We ask that you recommend that the property be used in a manner consistent with our neighborhood conservation overlay district. Thank you.
Hi, my name is David Weissel. If you could go to slide 5, please. I live directly next door to the lot, and I also speak for neighbors who are across the street and can see this lot out their front window. Rezoning the site is going to negatively impact our daily living conditions and routines. I just want to remind you that those in opposition to the rezoning are families. Many of the homes near this lot, including my own, have young children who live and play in the neighborhood, and rezoning would mean the removal of hundreds of mature trees that help define the Brookhaven neighborhood and leaving it as one massive impervious surface. It would effectively be eliminating the entrance in the heart of Brookhaven. And we're not anti-development. I grew up in Raleigh, and I've loved seeing it grow while still maintaining the community feel. But this rezoning inside of a neighborhood is unwarranted and unwanted. The developer has said that the lot is not fit for residential use given its proximity to Glenwood Avenue, but then they ironically argue it's a safe place to put a daycare with over 150 small children. If you could go to slide 6. The truth is there is room for a large single-family home on the lot with adequate buffering for Glenwood Avenue. However, trying to fit a 15,000 square foot daycare onto a just over 1 acre neighborhood lot does not make common sense. You could develop the site even as 2 residential lots and still be compatible with NCOD, but removing this residential lot from the Brookhaven South NCOD and allowing commercial development off this neighborhood street would not protect the character and the Brookhaven quality of life that it has for its residents. As Chad mentioned, we've made a petition with several hundred signatures, created a website, and even formed a nonprofit to help us voice the concerns of the neighborhood. We have support from other surrounding neighborhoods like Oak Park, Glen Forest, Dublin Park, and they're all invested in keeping their communities residential. Not only would rezoning this lot upset residents, but it could set an unwanted precedent for similar lots in the neighborhood. And I know you can't see them due to this meeting being virtual, but I can guarantee there's hundreds of Brookhaven and Raleigh residents watching who are in solidarity with us and believe that rezoning would be inappropriate land use for this site. We do thank you for your time and plead with you to consider these arguments and think of how you would feel if this was taking place in your neighborhood right next door to your own home. Thank you.
I believe that's the final speaker. I'd now like to allow for questions and comments from the commissioners. I'm going to start out with a question for transportation staff. If I'm remembering correctly, a couple years ago, there had been a proposal for a sidewalk project in the neighborhood. There was a petition that was circulated at that time to not move forward with the sidewalk. Do we know what the status is of that at this point?
Hi, good morning. This is Ann Conlon with Transportation Planning, and I'm actually going to defer to my colleague Jason Myers. Sorry for the switch there.
Sure, it's Jason Myers with Transportation. There were 2 different sidewalk petitions on Rembert Drive that were circulated. One of them succeeded and is now a adopted project by City Council. The other one was denied by the residents or the property owners around that street. The one closest to Glenwood Avenue is the one that did not succeed. The section of Rembert, I think, broken at Winthrop. Out to the east is the part that is now a project, along with the Brookhaven sidewalk that goes south to Glenwood Avenue. So those 2 are both in the queue for implementation by the city's engineering services department. They're one of the more recent sidewalk petitions that were succeeded and adopted by council, and they're also some of the more expensive sidewalks. So given our newer priority system, they may be a little bit further out. So I can't give you a date on when those will be complete, but there are in our CIP projects to build sidewalk from Winthrop to Glenwood Avenue on Brookhaven and Rembert.
Thank you for that. Do any other commissioners have questions or comments? Commissioner Bennett?
Thank you, Chair Fox. I have a couple of questions for transportation. Did the TIA that was done assume that there is a dedicated left turn lane on Rembert? Because there is not. And if it did, how might that have affected the results that we're seeing?
Hi, good morning. Ann Conlon again. The TIA did account for 2 lanes at the intersection on the Rembert approach. It did not account for a left turn signal. The signal itself was modeled correctly, but it did show 2 lanes there. And that's something that during the review process, I discussed with the traffic engineer. There are 2, I'm sorry, let's getting this straight in my head. There's pavement width for stacking, and we agreed to that, but upon review, I think it would be more appropriate to model that as a single approach, perhaps with a little bit of stacking for right turns. So to the second part of your question, that would have a minor impact on delay and queuing on that approach.
Oh, okay. So I'm trying to understand that. So if the TIA assumed that there are 2 lanes there, it seems that that would reduce the queue because you have 2 lanes of traffic. But if there's actually only 1 lane, it seems like the queue would be longer than what is assumed in the TIA.
Yes, I'm sorry, I didn't state that clearly. So you're correct. So I think if that were remodeled without the 2 lanes, it was accounting for basically 50 foot of 2 lanes there. If we removed that, you would see an increase in delay and queuing.
Okay.
At that location, yes.
Okay. Chair Fox, can I ask another question, please?
Please do so.
My other question is, did the TIA assume the expanded York Elementary School?
The TIA did not account for the York Elementary School. I looked at the TIA that was completed for that expansion, and it did not route any traffic through this intersection specifically. The intersection of Glenwood and Rembert was not part of that study area. I looked at the numbers, and there were 7 vehicles that coming out of that study would have been coming up Glenwood through this intersection. So if it were to be incorporated, that's what would get added. And I will note that the background traffic included on Glenwood in this study included about 105 additional vehicles for that movement.
Okay. And my final question, and this is for planning staff, I think. I think I heard in one of the commenters' remarks that a 2017 request, very similar to this one, was determined to be inconsistent by staff and was not recommended for approval. Did I hear that right? And if I did, what is different this time that staff is considering it consistent from last time in 2017 when it was inconsistent?
Sure, I can answer that. This is Hannah Reckow. So I believe the request that was referenced was Z317. That was also an OX3 CU request. The conditions were a little different. That request had one condition that needed a list of uses that would normally be permitted in OX. So this request is taking sort of a different approach to that condition and just listing a much shorter list of uses that would be permitted, and then also adds conditions 2, 3, and 4, which address residential density, building height, and overall building size. So those conditions helped consistency with a lot of policies that were deemed consistent this time. And I can answer questions about specific ones if you have them.
That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Bennett. Commissioner McIntosh?
Yeah, I have a question for staff. So I'm looking at the list of consistent policies, and a couple of them reinforcing the urban pattern and infill compatibility. I'm guessing that's in relation to the commercial development along Glenwood, but I'm wondering, it seems like from a layperson's standpoint, it seems like reinforcing the pattern of the neighborhood would also be a part of that. Could you talk about those 2 policies and what they cover? Because I guess I'm concerned about the breakup of the street pattern within the neighborhood. And I'm sorry, I'm talking more than I was going to ask a question, but it feels like this is cutting out a portion of the neighborhood so that now we're going to kind of have these houses in the neighborhood street that are just kind of on their own without a house across the street anymore. And it feels like it's breaking up the street experience in the neighborhood. And I'm wondering if there's something in planning that would address that. I mean, it's not compatible with, sorry, I'm talking so much. We're saying it's inconsistent with conservation of single family neighborhoods. And it just feels like, I wish there was a way for there to be a way to make those work together, because this just feels like it's cutting out. I'm sorry, could you just talk about those two policies? I'm sorry, I'm talking so much.
Actually, if I may, I'm gonna tag on to that one a little bit. I would like to hear from staff a little bit. It's my understanding the NCODs in general, they regulate form, but not necessarily use. Is there an instance of an NCOD elsewhere in the city that has mixed use component within the boundaries of the overlay?
Yes, one that immediately springs to mind is on Edenton Street, which overlays a large amount of OX3 zoning. And so the NCODs are only allowed to regulate certain built environmental characteristics, usually related to the size of buildings, setbacks, and the subdivision of land. So you can set a smaller or larger lot size than the underlying zoning allows. You can limit building height to something lower than the base district would allow, and you could change the setbacks and things of that nature, primarily what NCODs are used for. So an NCOD that overlaid a mixed-use zone would still regulate those things. It would regulate how large or small your lot could be. It would regulate how tall your building could be, and it would regulate setbacks. I believe in this case, the applicant indicated that they felt there's 4 standards in the NCOD here, and that the one that they would run afoul of with their current plan is the requirement for a 50-foot front yard setback, which is in the section of the Brookhaven NCOD. They wanted to have a smaller front yard setback for their frontage along Glenwood and River. So, so in order to meet that setback, the only way they can do that is to have a smaller setback than 50 feet. They would have to remove the NCOD.
And I can jump in and try to address Commissioner McIntosh's questions about the policy analysis. So as I briefly mentioned in the presentation, those policies were considered kind of both contexts that the site is at. So reinforcing the form and infill development, the request is very similar, would allow development that's very similar to what's along Glenwood Avenue. And then there are conditions that address some of the form and impacts of it being commercial use that make it a little more similar to the surrounding residential development.
Commissioner McIntosh, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, let's just follow up with, one thought that was raised by a lot of neighbors who've written to us is that this neighborhood's very wooded with, oak trees, and it's a wooded neighborhood, but this new development's not maintaining, it doesn't look like it's maintaining any tree conservation. And so it does feel like it's a departure from the feel of the rest of the lots, and especially just the symmetry of driving in along that street and having wooded lots on one side and then a complete new development with no established trees. It does. I mean, I was going, there was actually it was an email from Francis Salema who spoke, asking if there could be some tree conservation, and from the site plan, it didn't look like there's room for that, but it feels like a real departure from the existing feel of the place, and I guess I'm concerned about that.
I'd like to ask of the applicant, one, to respond to some of the comments about traffic impact analysis, and then two, if they have considered additional tree save or tree protection.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I would like Chase Smith to respond to the traffic questions. As to tree conservation, this site is lower than the 2 acres that would require that, and also the site is really consumes most of the site by required improvements. So I don't think there'll be an area for dedicated tree conservation, but I would like Chase Smith to respond to the traffic issues, the lanes on Glenwood, and whether or not the York Elementary was taken into account for that TIA. If you could unmute him.
All right, thank you, Isabel. So yeah, the York Elementary School was not technically taken into account. There was no additional traffic specifically designated to the York Elementary School that we accounted for. Again, this was this traffic study was scoped through the city of Raleigh and NCDOT. That was not something that they had us include, but they do have us include background growth, which for this was 2%. So 2% for a couple of years. What is it? The build out year was, sorry, just taking a peek real quick. It was 1 year. So we're adding 2% of traffic for every movement on Glenwood, Rembert, Fairhill, all of those movements. And as they were speaking to earlier, the amount of traffic that the York Elementary, the approved York Elementary traffic study had heading in this general direction would have been accounted for in that background growth. And then as to the lanes on Rembert Drive, again, when we set these things up, we're setting them up based on information provided by NCDOT. Signal plans that we gathered from NCDOT show, they do not technically show 2 lanes of approach for Rembert Drive, but there are 2 signal loops in the roadway that set up for 2 separate movements. There are also 2 signal heads in the westbound direction when you're traveling on Rembert to get onto Glenwood. And those are permitted movements. So Rembert and Fairhill are making their movements at the same time. The reason that we did split the movements on Rembert is because there is a designated left turn lane on Fairhill, and typically when you have a left turn lane on one approach and you have 2 movements opposing, you would align the left turns, which is why we assumed there was an exclusive left turn movement and then broke up the shared through right turns. So no, it's not necessarily striped for splitting the lefts and the through right movements, but everything out there shows that it would accommodate splitting those movements on the Rembert Drive approach. And again, this was approved. The methodology was approved both by the city and NCDOT.
And I'd like, if I could, I would like to get Stuart Rogers to speak to the trees. I think he may have a better answer than I had.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Stuart Rogers with Mazer Consulting, the site engineer. The site does have a number of trees, and many of those fall in the buffer areas and in the other green spaces of the project, and we will be preserving all the trees that we can that exist, and many of those fall in the buffers, so that you'll see us on the perimeter of the site where there already are nice existing trees. Those will be preserved.
Thank you for that. Are there any additional questions? Commissioner O'Haver?
Thanks, Chair Fox. I'd like to get back to the TIA scoping. The neighbors brought in an engineer, and I guess I would like to hear a little bit more from their engineer on their thoughts on the need for scoping. Then I'd like for Jason Myers to respond on why those were not included. I think we'll need to unmute the neighborhood, I guess. I'm not sure how you have the mic set up.
There we go. They just turned me back on. Can everyone hear me okay? This is Danny
Yes,
Howell.
sir, we can.
Thank you, Brian. Yes, can we bring up slide 5 from or slide 4 from our presentation again, please? I think that'll help with talking with some of the stuff about York and the intersections. Perfect. Thank you. Again, I hope everyone can see our site on this map. We're the red site up near Rembert and Glenwood. So the existing TIA looked at that intersection in blue directly beside it. What we are talking about, and again, as you can see from this picture, you can see some of the things we talked about, where they were saying the consistency of the uses along Glenwood. If you notice, again, when the main part of Brookhaven closer to Creedmoor Road, you see there's a ton of frontage along Creedmoor Road on the south here that is also Brookhaven, that is all residential along Glenwood. And all of these lots back up to Glenwood. So I think we're kind of underestimating just how large Brookhaven subdivision really is. But again, York Elementary is located right in the center of this southern portion below the larger green park portion. And again, is currently under construction for an expansion. I think they're going from 400 plus students to 650 students, which is obviously more than a 2% increase. They spoke about the TIA only said 7 vehicles. I just can't even imagine how that's possible. But again, just after living in the neighborhood and all the traffic leaving here comes out through this intersection or out back of this subdivision to Millbrook. So a ton of York traffic comes through the neighborhood for that. So there's gonna be a lot more traffic coming from the York expansion that was accounted for in the TIA. And the TIA also speaks to the existing conditions. The NCDOT plan that was provided in the TIA shows the correct conditions, which was a single lane on Rembert onto Glenwood. It's a through left and right lane, only one lane. So the queuing and stacking should have been based, and the delays should have been based off of the single lane. So the information provided by NCDOT was the correct part of the existing conditions. It just differed from what was accounted for in the TIA. So I say, looking at the other circled intersections, again, this is going to be after you've gone through this intersection one time, which I hope several of you, the commissioners, can make it through the area and see exactly what we're talking about, because you can do as many TIAs as you want to, but to recreate what's actually happening out there, living it, is a whole different story. And I spent a greater part of the last 5 or 6 years sitting at that stoplight. And so I can speak firsthand. But again, you're going to start going in opposite directions. And it's going to create traffic through Devlin, through Brookhaven, traffic trying to get further out north or west on Glenwood, and traffic trying to get back, even going the opposite direction. The next full access movement to the south is at Moorhead and Glenwood West. That's the other circle you see on Glenwood Avenue to the south. So you're going to go through the neighborhood to get to Moorhead, because it's a full access movement. You can actually get out and cross Glenwood at that section and go east into towards downtown Raleigh. So, and again, then we have another intersection you look at is Winthrop, because people are going to cut through to get to Millbrook and go north. For all your people that are leaving the site wanting to go north, they're going to cut through and try to get to Millbrook and start heading north. So I hope that answers some of the questions. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Commissioner Miller.
Can we have staff respond to that? Sorry, Commissioner Miller.
Yeah, I wanted staff's response to that. I just wanted to, I feel like the crux of this issue is the policy LU 5.2, managing commercial development impacts, where the staff report says that this new commercial development does not result in unreasonable or unexpected traffic on the surrounding residential areas. And it says below that that's based on this traffic impact analysis. And it sounds like there's some question of fact here about the accuracy of that traffic impact analysis. And there's a discrepancy between the TIA and what the neighbors say are the actual conditions on the ground. And I drove out there this weekend and certainly see what the neighbors are concerned about. So I wanted to have staff also echoing Commissioner Havers, speak directly to that factual question.
Good morning. This is Ann Conlon, Transportation Planning. I'm going to try to respond to that point by point, and then Commissioner O'Haver, if there's anything you want me to elaborate on, please let me know. So the first question was about the scope of the study. And, we base the scope of a TIA on the amount of traffic. So when we're looking at big developments, we tend to expand more broadly and look at more intersections. And we thought it was appropriate to focus this TIA on the Glenwood-Rembert intersection based on the size of the development and the nature of, Glenwood being the major road. I think the TIA estimated 15% of trips exiting would go right out of the site and through the neighborhood. That's not, volume where we would expect to see a capacity issue at neighborhood intersections. And our TIA process isn't really set up to analyze neighborhood impacts because it's focused on infrastructure sufficiency and capacity analysis. To the second question about York Elementary, I think I answered that already, but the key point there is that no, we did not specifically add trips from that proposed increase, but like I said, the number of trips associated with the increase to that elementary school is 7 trips through the intersection, and the background growth did account for 100 new trips. And I know it can sound like, wow, how is it only 7 trips? But I just want to be clear that we're talking about an increase. So all the existing traffic to that school, would have been included in the counts that were obtained. And then the third point was the approach. And to that point, I think the critique here is a good one, and we would more appropriately model that approach as a single lane. And that's something we could look to do in a TIA addendum, if you all would like.
Would staff be able to accomplish that in a 2-week time span? So for our next regularly scheduled meeting?
I think that depends on how quickly our Ramey Camp could turn it around. And potentially, yes.
Okay, with that, without objection, I'd like to recommend that we hold this case to allow some remodeling of the traffic impact and allow staff to review some of the materials we received late yesterday. Commissioner Lankman?
Yeah, I would encourage holding this at the table too. I'm wondering if I could request additional documents from staff. One would be I didn't realize the sidewalk. There was a sidewalk proposal. Can I get that one? Z317, that one, and the supporting documents. The detailed TIAs, if that's possible. The applicant presentation, if that's possible. And then the Brookhaven presentation, if that's possible.
Okay, along with those requests, without any opposition, we're going to hold this at the table. Okay, seeing none, I'm going to move on to item D.2, case number Z5920. This is a request to rezone approximately 11 acres of land on Capitol Boulevard near Crabtree Boulevard from commercial mixed use 7 stories, urban limited, to commercial mixed use 7 stories, conditional use. Ira Mabel will present on behalf of staff.
Yes, good morning, everybody. This request is for just over 11 acres for pretty similar zoning from what exists now. So currently ZX7 with an urban limited frontage, and the request is still CX7 with some conditions. And your deadline is in April. Next slide, please. So this is at the corner of Capitol Boulevard and Crabtree Boulevard. And so Capitol Boulevard, as is the case for most of its length, is fairly commercially zoned. As is the case here, this is one of the sections with quite a lot of industrial zoning. But there is residential zoning just behind this property to the southeast, that R10 area. Next slide. So here's a little zoom out view to get you oriented. This is fairly close to the 440 and Capitol interchange, near a couple other rezoning cases that you've seen or will see pretty soon. And the next slide is a bit of a closer aerial. So currently the site contains the headquarters of the food bank of Eastern and Central North Carolina. So that's that warehouse looking building towards the rear there. And right behind the Greyhound bus station. Next slide. Some photos of the site. That number one in the top right there is interior to the site. So there is a drive aisle that's currently not a public street, but does connect from Crabtree to Capitol Boulevard across the site. And then that number two is the view from Capitol itself to the entrance to the food bank. Next slide, please. So 3 conditions on the site, all relating to form. The first one is about a build to, and then no parking between the buildings and the street. I would say that the street plan on the site, so if the site were to redevelop, that internal drive would be dedicated as a new public street. So under a full site plan, this condition would apply to that street, probably, as the primary. And then street-facing entrances on new buildings. Next slide, please. So the request here is no change in entitlement. Really, it is just removing the urban limited frontage and replacing with those conditions I mentioned. So all the existing entitlement would remain as is. Next slide, please. Fairly high walk and transit score in the site. We can go fairly quickly through these, JP. So next slide. Pretty good transit service. The number one goes up Capitol at fairly high frequency already. Next slide. And really no change to the types of housing that could go here. Next slide, please. Request is consistent with the urban form map. Future land use map, which is community mixed use, basically for all of this commercial zoned area at this intersection. And next slide is consistent with the urban form map because of those conditions, maintaining the parking limited features, the build to the parking between the building and the street, and so on. Next slide, please. Just one other note here before we get into the policies. The equitable development around transit plan is thinking about or envisioning a BRT station at Capitol and Crabtree. This route, the northern route, is most likely going to be the 4th and final route that's planned. So, this station locations definitely are not final. But our right now, our best guess is that the northern BRT would end basically at the intersection that this site is at. So hence the application of a lot of the transit policies in the staff report. Next slide, please. So consistent with the comprehensive plan overall. Next slide, please. So consistent with the capitalized on transit access, station area land use, all those things related to the BRT station that is likely going to be nearby. And the site is in the Capitol Boulevard small area plan, although there is not a lot in that plan that applies directly to this location. But the plan does say there should be a mix of zoning for a mix of business uses. Next slide is the inconsistent policies really are about buffering and transitioning to the neighborhood, that R10 zone neighborhood that I pointed out to the southeast. So although the future land use map does reinforce the difference or the community mixed use adjacent to the residential in the designation. The comp plan does say that when that thing happens, or when that condition happens, there should be some transitioning on the property, the commercial property. So some conditions talking about building placement or buffering would address these policies. But despite that, still consistent with the plan overall. Next slide. And your deadline, as I mentioned, is in April. Happy to answer any clarifying questions before the presentation from the applicant.
All right, seeing none. Next, we'll hear from Toby Coleman, representing the applicant. The applicant and all those in support have 10 minutes to speak.
Good morning, planning commissioners. Toby Coleman, 150 Fayetteville Street. I'm with Smith Anderson here on behalf of the Food Bank of Central and Eastern North Carolina. With me today, although I don't anticipate her needing to speak unless there are questions, is Megan Weeks. She is the creative and brand manager for the Food Bank. I don't think I need to add a whole lot here, but just to emphasize that the rezoning here is to permit the Food Bank to place a ground sign on Capitol Boulevard in front of the Food Bank's headquarters there at 1920 Capitol Boulevard, so that clients and volunteers can find it. JP, if you wouldn't mind throwing up the staff slides and go to the photo slide. I think it's the third slide. I think that's a bit illustrative. While JP's doing that, what you'll see, if you go, let's see, maybe 2 slides further. There we go. Perfect. So, that slide at the bottom right there is what you see when you're driving on Capitol northbound towards 440. That's in the distance. There is the headquarters. Basically, Food Bank bought this site a few years ago. It was an existing site, based on the existing suburban development pattern there on Capitol Boulevard. And as anybody who has ever driven on Capitol Boulevard can attest, this is a fast-moving traffic, and there's no sidewalks in front of it, and the buildings are set very far away. So you really need a sign. There's a temporary sign there now, and so what Food Bank is looking for is a new ground sign. As Ira mentioned, really this rezoning is being proposed because the property's current zoning does not permit ground signs, and that's the only reason. We're not seeking any additional entitlements. We're not seeking to change anything about the existing zoning. The urban limited frontage is the issue, and the city placed it on the property during the citywide remapping. I think it was sort of an effort it's hopeful, right? It's someday Capitol Boulevard will be very different and have sidewalks and pedestrians. We're seeking with this rezoning to resolve the issue that prevents the Food Bank from installing the ground sign by removing the urban limited designation. We worked with staff on this and added a couple of conditions that basically say that in the distant future, if this property is redeveloped, there's going to be frontage, various requirements that impose sort of frontage development requirements consistent with the city's urban frontage designations. I want to reiterate just, I think everybody knows this, but this is not in connection with Food Bank's plan to move its headquarters or redevelop its headquarters. This is solely so that it can get a sign. I want to say, I appreciate that a conditional use zoning to install a sign is probably not something you guys see every meeting. I certainly haven't seen it in my practice before. And as I've mentioned, I think in my email to y'all, this was not Food Bank's first choice or even its second choice. This was something that came out of sort of a tangled procedural history, and as a result of city staff's decision that the Food Bank is legally prohibited from seeking a variance to install a sign under its current zoning. So as a result of that, it's left with no choice but to seek a rezoning to do that, and that's why we're here. And with that, we're available for questions.
And Mr. Moderator, are there any members of the public signed up to speak on this matter?
I don't have any.
Okay, excellent. I'd now like to allow questions and comments from commissioners. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Commissioner Miller? I think you're muted.
There it is. Thank
you.
I wanted to thank the applicant for submitting this project application to add a sign, ground sign for the food bank. And wish we didn't have to go through a rezoning process for this, but hopefully we can make swift work of it.
Thank you. Any additional questions or comments? With that, I'd like to entertain a motion. Commissioner McIntosh.
I'd like to make a motion. I move to recommend approval of rezoning case Z5920. The rezoning request is consistent with the comprehensive plan, future land use map, urban form map, and Capitol Boulevard Gateway area specific guidance. The request is reasonable and in the public interest because it will allow a high level of land use intensity adjacent to a BRT station and will allow desired site improvements by an important community service provider.
We have a motion on the table from Commissioner McIntosh. Looks like we might have a second from Commissioner Bennett. Excellent.
Second.
Perfect, thank you. We have a motion and a second on the table. With that, I will ask Shanitha for a roll call of members to record their individual votes. At the end of the roll call, I will announce the outcome of the vote.
Good morning. Commissioner Bennett, how do you vote?
Aye.
Chair Fox?
Aye.
Commissioner Lampman?
Aye.
Commissioner Mann?
Aye.
Commissioner McIntosh?
Aye.
Commissioner Miller?
Aye.
Commissioner O'Haver?
Aye.
Commissioner Raines?
Aye.
And Commissioner Winters?
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously. Moving on to item D.3, that's case number Z6220. This is a request to rezone approximately 1.5 acres of land from residential 4 with special residential parking overlay district to residential 6. The overlay district would remain. Hannah Reckow will present on behalf of staff.
Good morning, everyone. So this is request Z6220. It's a request to rezone 3 properties, 3300, 3304, and 3308 Avent Ferry Road from R4 to R6. There is a special residential parking overlay district that would remain, and our deadline is April 26th. Next slide. So this shows the zoning context. There is generally residential zoning located north of this portion of Avent Ferry Road, including some R10, RX3 districts to the east, and then largely mixed use districts south, on the south side of Avent Ferry Road. Next slide, please. So this site is located in southwest Raleigh, west of the intersection of Avent Ferry Road and Gorman Street. As I mentioned, there's a mix of residential densities in this area. And then directly south is a shopping center. This one has a Food Lion as the anchor. Go to the next slide. We can see close-up aerial of the site. There's three parcels and 3 detached houses. And you can see to the east, it abuts an apartment complex. And then the entrance of the shopping center is directly south. Next slide. Here are 2 views of the site. It only has frontage on Avent Ferry Road. There, as I said, are detached houses and it's partially forested along this frontage. Next slide. So the requested district is a general use district. So there are no zoning conditions that have been offered. Next slide. And so the main change that is happening here is that the request would raise the maximum density of residential units from 4 to 6 per acre. And then the minimum setbacks would also change to allow a denser form of development. Next slide. The site is designated on the future land use map as low density residential, which requests residential development between 1 and 6 dwelling units per acre. So R6 is consistent with that designation. Next slide. Avent Ferry Road, this portion of it is designated as an urban thoroughfare on the urban form map. And the site is north of a mixed use center. The urban thoroughfare would recommend a zoning frontage be added. That can only be done to a mixed use request. So it's being a residential district is neither consistent nor inconsistent with that urban form guidance. Next slide. The request is consistent overall with the comprehensive plan. And again, that includes consistency with the future land use map designation. The next slide shows some of the consistent policies. So development possible under R6 would be similar to the surrounding area. There would be also a small increase in the number of possible units on the site. Next slide. I believe there was just one inconsistent policy. This is one that recommends that single family lots not front on major streets. And that would still be possible under this request. So it's inconsistent for that reason. And that ties up the staff presentation. Again, your deadline is April 26th. The last regularly scheduled meeting before that is April 20th.
Thank you, Ms. Ruckow. Next, we'll hear from Timothy Stevens representing the applicant. The applicant and all those in support have 10 minutes to speak.
Good morning. I'm Timothy Stevens, the applicant for subject Z-62-20, seeking R6 to rezone 3 consecutive properties located at 3300, 3304, and 3308 Avent Ferry Road. Additionally, I have Mike Zaccardo, Senior Project Manager, and Beth Blackman, Project Engineer for the Timmons Group, available as well for any questions. We feel that our project is consistent with the future land use and appreciate the City of Raleigh for their time and effort on this project. Thank you.
There are a few members of the public signed up to speak on this matter, and the speakers have 2 minutes each to provide comment.
All right, the first speaker I have is Corinne Wilson.
Hello. So my name is Corinne Wilson. I live at 3309 Octavia Street, located directly behind one of the properties subject to this rezoning case. We have a number of concerns we would like to express regarding this case. Looking at the case information form for this proposal, we'd like to address several inconsistencies with the 2030 comprehensive plan. Number 1 is the future land use compliance. These subject properties have a future land use of low density residential. According to Chapter 3 of the comprehensive plan, low density residential corresponds to single family detached residential homes in R2, R4, and R6 zoning districts. The application, however, states that both detached or attached homes have been considered for these lots. While detached homes meet the criteria, the use of attached homes does not. Instead, the comprehensive plan states that smaller lots, townhouses, and multifamily dwellings would only be appropriate as part of a conservation subdivision, resulting in a significant open space set aside. We'd like to request that the application be modified to include this requirement or give us more additional information on what's proposed at this site, since we've gotten none. Number 2, the applicant stated consistency with the UDO policy, or the LU policy 8.10 for infill development, which states that to encourage infill development on vacant land within the city, particularly in areas that there are vacant lots that create gaps in the urban fabric. Such development should complement the established character of the area and should not create sharp changes in the physical development pattern. This doesn't apply to this property in question, as there currently occupies single-family residences, not vacant land. A more appropriate policy application would be policy LU 8.5, conversation of single-family neighborhoods. This policy is designed to both protect and conserve the city's single-family neighborhoods and ensure that their zoning reflects the established low-density character, and to protect low-density character, preserve open space, and maintain neighborhood scale. In order to be consistent with policy LU 8.5, these properties should be limited to single-family detached homes. In addition to these inconsistencies, we have, I thought there were only 2 people speaking today, so I had 5 minutes of
Without objection,
speaking time.
we'll let you continue as long as the number of speakers doesn't go over 10 minutes total.
Thank you. Okay. So in addition to these inconsistencies between the application and the 2038 comprehensive plan, we have several additional concerns after conferring with our neighbors, including privacy, light and noise alterations, and environmental impacts. Number 1, privacy. This concerns the height allowed in R6, which is 3 stories, versus the existing condition of R4, 2 stories. Anything taller than 2 stories would give a direct view into our backyard and neighboring backyards, and any attempt to combat that would greatly impact the natural sunlight into our backyard and the adjacent properties. We request that this development be limited to 2 stories as a condition. Secondly, alterations in light and noise. We have not seen updated plans since this application was originally submitted as R10. So assuming the same pattern of 4+ parking spots per unit, or 32 or more parking spots total, we have concern for the increase in artificial light spillover onto adjacent lots for any parking lots constructed, including headlights and any parking lot lights, as well as the noise from the traffic associated with a large parking lot. And lastly, environmental impacts. If the applicant maximizes what is allowed under R6, we have concerns with this development altering the existing hydrology to the point where it will negatively impact upstream properties. Specifically, tree removal and subsequent compaction and construction of large parking areas that would alter the existing drainage pattern on our block. Currently, stormwater from the 3300 block of Octavia Street drains through property backyards toward the subject property, 3300 Avent Ferry Road, and into an existing stormwater network. By interrupting this drainage pattern, backyard ponding of upstream properties can lead to impacts on the environmental conditions of upstream adjacent properties. Secondly, the percentage of allowable impervious area increases from R4 to R6 from 38% to 51%. This increase in impervious area leads to stormwater impacts such as increased peak discharges and water quality concerns. We want to ensure that any development on this property is subject to the new stormwater rules to detain and treat stormwater for storms up to a 10-year frequency. Additionally, we want to request that stormwater impacts of the 100-year storm are analyzed to determine any upstream impacts due to existing flooding concerns and ephemeral water flows as mentioned above. And lastly, there are a large number of existing trees on the back property lines of homes on the 3300 block of Octavia Street, which abut these properties. We want to ensure that proper tree protection is taken into account to ensure tree survival, including no temporary or permanent disturbance in the critical root zone of these trees. In conclusion, we don't see any impacts being as severe for single-family detached residences on these properties, but want to make sure our concerns are addressed and researched by the Planning Commission prior to any formal recommendation. And I also want to echo that we haven't seen any updated plans for this since it was included as an R10. So without having that additional information, it's very hard for the neighborhood to understand what's going on there. So thank you all for your time. And I believe I'm passing it off to George at this point.
Yep, the next speaker is George Reeves.
Yes, my wife and I have lived in Woodwood Park for 58 years. 5 generations of our family have enjoyed 3324 Octavia Street, and we'd like to see the neighborhood preserved. I'm an entrepreneur, and I understand the value and the profit motive. Development's essential to meet the needs of an increasing population, but there are other considerations beyond just the short-term profit. If profitable development has a relatively short time horizon of a few years, whereas city planning looks at decades into the future and puts a high value on non-monetary quality of life. Zoning is a mechanism that lets us, as a city, make development conform to the city's long-term needs. And I've lived here long enough in one place to see that zoning decisions have consequences that echo for generations. This zoning request, Z6220, is a threat to the continued existence of Wynwood Park. If the Avent Ferry Road boundary to R4 neighborhoods is breached to create a high-profit student bedroom group, then the adjacent homes become less desirable, triggering repeated teardowns and rezonings. This zoning request has no restrictions, and the developer has previously built student bedroom duplexes, and so we can see what he has in mind. He hasn't supplied any other further information beyond the initial R10 neighborhood meeting. So successive rezonings and changing single-family homes into student bedrooms is a threat to Wynwood. So is Wynwood worth preserving? Well, Wynwood's a good example of what good zoning guided development produces. It's a cooperative community guided by the golden rule. We don't have a homeowners association and don't need one. If you lose a dog, the odds are that a neighbor will find it for you and return it. If you have a first baby, there's a good chance that a neighbor will give you a hand-crocheted baby blanket. If you need help, one or more neighbors are likely to give it. It's economically and racially diverse. Some in the neighborhood are in the 1% economically, and some are just getting by. We have white, black, and brown neighbors, and we all get along very well. We've got couples starting out, just beginning in the families, and we've got retired people in their 90s. Home values are in the $200,000 to $400,000 range, which is exactly what Raleigh needs and is short of right now. Another factor is that nearly all of these homes are single story, so they're free from troublesome stairs, which are a problem for people with disabilities, such as bad knees. Wynwood's the kind of neighborhood where people add on instead of moving when they need more space or become more affluent. They do that because they like the neighbors in the neighborhood. We were sad to see several decades ago the wild blackberries in the field across Avent Ferry disappear, but we're glad to have the shopping center for the convenience and a place to walk to take care of our needs. So we see the benefit of development and zoning, but we also see the risks. We enjoy our convenient inside the Beltline location and the Walnut Creek Greenway to Lake Johnson. Again, good development. Our award-winning A.B. Combs Elementary School is the perfect school for young children. It was the best magnet school in the country in 2006 and 2014. It's a real city asset, which is not widely recognized. In short, Wynwood Park is a great place for families of all income levels. It would be a terrible place to put student bedrooms.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your comments, sir. I'd now like to allow for questions and comments from commissioners. I'd like to start off with a clarifying question of staff. The requested rezoning is for R6, which my read of the code shows R6 allows single family and duplex, but it does not allow apartment style development. Is that accurate?
That is correct. It would allow attached and detached building types, but not townhouse or apartment currently. Thank you.
Do any other commissioners have questions for staff or the applicant? Commissioner McIntosh?
I'm just wondering if the comprehensive plan or the UDO has any designation to differentiate between mean, I realize it's a gray area. I'm having a hard time. It sounds like it's likely that the proposal is for student housing, but it's being presented as low density housing. And I mean, I understand the pitfalls of differentiating on roommates versus people who are related. And I guess I'm not asking to go down that path, but it just, the idea that this might be a student housing development that's being presented as something else just hits me as wrong. And I'm wondering if there's anything in the comp plan to address this.
If I can address that, the future land use map paints in somewhat broad categories, so we don't have a category for every flavor of residential density that's in the UDO. And as a result, between rural residential and low density residential, there's a range of densities that are considered consistent, which would include R2, R4, and R6. Bulk of this area is R4. This introduces a small amount of R6, but that would still be considered consistent with the comprehensive plan. And of course, in many parts of the city, R6 and R4 do adjoin each other today and still seem to maintain a neighborhood fabric. This being close to the university obviously lends a different flavor to it, as it often does when you're in an area that has historically housed a lot of students, but the code and the comp plan don't really focus in on that in terms of how the policies are expressed.
Commissioner Lampman.
Thanks. I just want to ask a clarifying question. So on this site, if it's an R6, it will be limited to duplexes only. And I understand that there is a potential text change to allow for townhomes in a R6. Would this be grandfathered in for duplexes only, or if that text change is approved, would they be allowed to develop townhomes in a slightly higher density?
Assuming this is a general use case, then if you change the standards of R6, then that would apply here without limitation. So there's no grandfathering in. If you allow townhouses in R6, and this is a general use R6, you'll be able to build townhouses assuming you can meet the other dimensional requirements of a townhouse development. But since a townhouse development under the code can be as small as 2 attached buildings, this site would certainly be large enough to accommodate that.
Commissioner McIntosh.
I guess I'd just like to clarify my concern about the density of housing that sounds like it's being proposed. I think is, it's not currently defined in the comp plan, and I'm not necessarily advocating that it be defined. I will say I live in a neighborhood with single family homes with 4+ adults, so we do have maybe 4 cars or more per house, and that's happened organically due to the affordability of my neighborhood. And I'm not suggesting that's something to be concerned about, but what I am concerned about is what sounds like is being proposed here is a plan for that density of residents within all of the units, and that they're planning for parking for all these people. And it just, there's something about that it doesn't feel like it. I think it doesn't respect the existing neighborhood pattern. And I mean, I'm fine with this in my own neighborhood where this has happened organically, but I'm bothered by the idea that it sounds like this is a plan where we're going to have these units that maybe have 4 bedrooms, and each bedroom is expected to be occupied by a separate resident, so that it feels like it's, while on paper, each of these houses is being considered one house, it's actually housing for 4 cars. I'm having a hard time expressing, but it just feels outside of what I think the comp plan is really asking for.
Can staff walk through how the special residential parking overlay district works?
I'll admit it's been a little while since I've delved into the details, but essentially it was crafted to regulate and get rid of sort of front yard parking, where rental houses had a lot of cars just kind of parked here and there on the front yard, and it requires you to put in an improved area. If you don't, you have to park the vehicles single file, and there's some other, I think, limitations. Maybe someone else wants to chime in, or if you give me a second, I can go back and look it up. But essentially, it prohibits the sort of parking in the front yard, which is often done without any sort of improvements, just on the grass or after a while on the dirt in houses where there were a lot of unrelated individuals living in that home. And it was designed to control that. And so it requires a certain level of improvement. And depending on how, as you go from, say, crush and run to paved areas, there's more flexibility in how that parking is located. So that's in broad terms how it works.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions or comments? Commissioner Miller? Yeah, I think you're on mute.
Thanks. So I was reviewing this case and its consistency with the comp plan. It looks like the staff has already addressed the specific policies that they deem consistent in reinforcing the urban pattern, infill development, and zoning for housing. And in addition, with respect to the housing policy 7.1, H7.1 with the quality and diversity of housing, it looks like this type of project, after the new text change, will also speak to housing variety and housing diversity and mixed income housing in neighborhoods as well. So I'm in support of this and was ready to make a motion. I see that Commissioner Raines also had his hand raised though, so wanted to see if he had additional thoughts.
Excellent. Commissioner Raines?
Yeah, I'm sorry. New to this, LU 810 infill development. Are there houses there now, or is it truly vacant? I'm looking at the images now. I don't.
There are currently structures.
If it's not vacant, could staff explain how this is applicable?
So there are currently houses on each property. This policy speaks to vacant lots and infill sites, and it is applied in thinking that if it's redeveloped as an infill site.
Okay, thanks. I was reading the excerpt, and as a resident noted, it strictly says vacant. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner McIntosh?
Yeah, to follow up on Commissioner Raines' question, I'd like to request, I guess this is a question for the developer, if they consider the conditions that were requested by Corinne Wilson, who was the first speaker. She sent an email to the commission this morning with a detailed list that she went over about stormwater, the issue of this being infill development, which is defined in the comprehensive plan as development on empty lots rather than displacement of existing housing. And I'm just wondering if you could take a look at her requests and potentially incorporate some of those as conditions.
Would the applicant like to answer that question?
Yes. Michelle, I appreciate your input and insight. But at this time, we feel comfortable with going with the rules of the city of Raleigh and how they interpret them. I've always been a great neighbor in anything I've ever developed. If you knocked on each door on each side of any property, they're all going to say that this guy saved the most trees, gave the most care, the most thought in any project in this area. And I will once again provide the same skills and care on this project as well. However, to Bend, we've already gone through stormwater assessment. We've already gone through traffic pattern assessments. We've gone through the parks, the recreation, transportation, and based on the city's interpretations, I feel that we're just trying to go by the book.
Commissioner Miller, did you have a comment?
Yes, if there were no additional comments, given this project's compliance with the city rules and regulations and the consistency with the comp plan, I'm ready to make a motion.
Go ahead, and we'll allow additional comment afterwards. I saw 2 hands pop up.
Gotcha. I move to approve case Z6220. It is consistent with the comprehensive plan and the future land use map, and in particular policies LU 1.2, LU 5.1, and H 1.8.
Thank you. Before I move on to additional comment or debate, do we have a second for the motion? Commissioner Haver?
Second.
Okay. Is there any additional debate on the merits of the motion? I saw Commissioner Bennett with a hand up.
Thank you. I'm not debating the merits of the motion. I just, I was actually okay with this one when we started. And as we talked about it, I don't know. It feels like I don't know what's happening here. I don't have good information. I would like to have heard more from the applicant about what's planned here. And then when it was called out that that policy on infill development applies to vacant lots and these aren't vacant, that kind of startled me a little bit. So I don't know. I don't feel. I wish the applicant had given us a little bit more.
If you want,
I feel like. I'm sorry.
Ma'am, if you'd like some more information, I'd certainly be able to provide that.
Okay, great. I mean, I just want to know more about what you're planning here.
Sure. What we're planning is a higher end development. I foresee this possibly being purchased by families. I know that someone has identified it exclusively as student housing. I don't believe that is a fair assessment at this point. As we all know, we can't control who buys certain properties, but it will have a nicer, higher end look. Currently, I believe we are under duplexes. However, there may be an opportunity to build townhomes. I prefer townhomes. I think they provide more value to the neighborhood as a whole. I think my end result would be a high-end product that's going to add value to the neighborhood. Our transportation studies are showing a few cars a day affected during the day. I know that we initially sit down and think, boy, this is going to be Grand Central Station. I think based on the study and based on my experience, this isn't the case. We do have the bus thoroughfares. It is the first exit in Raleigh coming off 40. So it is very attractive to families that want to live in Raleigh and not Cary. So I think to identify it exclusively as student housing isn't appropriate at this time, but I can ensure that it's going to be a high-end product. It's difficult to really present something because there's still some more steps to go through. But as the city says right now, it would be 8 units of 1,400 square feet. So they're pretty small. They're not ginormous. It's 1,400 square feet. And it's changing the land use from 8660 to 11267. So it's really bringing it up 2,600 square feet. So the site is going to be first class. It's going to follow all the rules of the city of Raleigh. I encourage people to look at any development that I've made, including my most recent one that was completed in July of last year, just a third of a mile down the street at 2721 and 2723 Avent Ferry Road. Nice stone on the front, Very, very aesthetic, nice aesthetic look. Only quality. If you look at the last 6 developments near NC State, if they're handing out awards, I would get first place because I care about my neighbors. I care about the end product, and I'm going to make something that's only going to add value to everybody's house behind it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens.
Thank you.
With that, I'm going to call the question. We have a motion on the table from Commissioner Miller and a second from Commissioner O'Haver. I'd like to ask Shanitha for a roll call of members to record their individual votes. Commissioner Linkman, did you have a question?
Yeah, I think Commissioner O'Haver had a question or a comment. I'm not sure. I was curious.
Commissioner O'Haver?
I just wanted some clarification. Commissioner Raines asked the same question I had, and Commissioner Bennett touched on it. Can someone just clarify for me? The reason I didn't have an issue is Commissioner Miller did not cite that as one of the policies, but I had a question because I heard that that policy could still be considered relevant and consistent. Can I get confirmation on that? Or is it moot at this point because it wasn't cited as a consistent policy by Commissioner Miller in the motion?
Policy LU 8.12 is included in the staff report and was, we did so because the policy points towards vacant lots and infill sites within existing neighborhoods and the potential for the site to be redeveloped, make it an infill development. Does that answer your question?
I think the answer is yes, is what I heard. Thank you.
Commissioner Bennett, did you have a question?
Yes, that bothers me. The potential for a site to be redeveloped makes it an infill site. That seems like a very slippery slope, and I'm not comfortable with that. I'm not comfortable with that being a policy that we're saying this is consistent with, because I see that being applied to some other neighborhoods that just really makes me uncomfortable. The potential for a site to be redeveloped makes it an infill site. How does that happen? You just look at a site with houses on it and say, oh, well, that could be redeveloped, so we're going to call that an infill site?
I'd like to propose a friendly amendment to Commissioner Miller's original motion. That particular policy in relationship to infill development be removed from the staff report. Do I have a second for the motion? Commissioner Raines?
Second.
Thank you. With that, I'll ask Shanitha for a roll call of members to record their individual votes. At the end of the roll call, I will announce the outcome of the vote.
Okay, and I'd like to clarify that the motion was changed, and so you are now the person making the motion, correct? And Mr. Raines, second.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. All right, Commissioner Bennett, how do you vote?
I'm not sure what the motion is anymore. I'm sorry.
Yeah, are you voting on revising Commissioner Miller's motion, or were you offering, if you were offering that as a friendly amendment and she accepts it, you don't need a second?
Okay, so it's a friendly amendment to her original motion, which did not cite the policy in question.
And so, Commissioner Miller, are you okay with that friendly amendment?
I am okay with that friendly amendment. So now, just for clarification, the motion is to approve Z6220, stating that its consistency with policy LU 1.2 regarding the future land use map, LU 5.1, regarding reinforcing the urban pattern, and H 1.8 zoning for housing. This motion is not citing LU 8.10 regarding infill development. And in addition, based on Chair Fox's friendly amendment, we are also including in this motion a motion to remove from the staff report this case's consistency with LU 8.10 infill development. Is that right?
O'Haver?
Yep.
I need to also second it again.
Yes, if you would.
Second Commissioner Miller's motion.
Perfect. There's the motion and the second on the table. And Shanita, can you continue with the roll call?
Yes, okay. Commissioner Bennett, how do you vote?
Nay.
Chair Fox?
Aye.
Commissioner Lampman?
Aye.
Commissioner Mann?
Aye.
Commissioner McIntosh?
Nay.
Commissioner Miller?
Aye.
Commissioner O'Haver?
Aye.
Commissioner Raines?
Aye.
And Commissioner Winters?
Nay.
And Shanita, please correct me if I'm wrong here. It appears the motion passes 5-3. Is that accurate?
I'm sorry, 6-3, I believe.
6-3. Thank you,
Yes.
ma'am. Excellent. Moving on to item D4, case number Z6320. This is a request to rezone approximately 2 acres of land from industrial mixed use 3 stories parking limited to commercial mixed use 3 stories conditional use. John Anagnost will present on behalf of staff.
Good morning. This is Ira Mabel again, filling in for John. So apologize, it's me again on another Capitol Boulevard case. But yeah, this request is just under 2 acres, IX3, CX3, and the removal of the parking limited frontage. And your deadline is, all new business today is April 26th. You can jump to the next slide, please. So again, zoning on Capitol Boulevard is primarily commercial in nature, as is the case here, particularly at this corner, a mix of IX and CX already. So go to the next slide. So this is on Capitol Boulevard north of the split with Lewisburg 401. So at Capitol and Spring Forest, you can see the existing pattern up here of development is, 1 or 2 story mid to large format commercial. So next slide, please. Currently on the site, on the southern portion, there is a gas station, and on the northern lot of the site, of the 2 lots, there is car rental. Next slide, please. So just some pictures, exactly what you would think a gas station and a car rental place would look like. And then the picture in the bottom of the slide is from Spring Forest Road. There are some conditions specifically referencing Spring Forest Road, which we will get to on next slide, please. Or finally, one more picture of just the corner. So that's Capitol to the right and Spring Forest there to the left. Next slide. So there's 4 conditions, all related to form, and all related to Spring Forest Road specifically, and not to Capitol. So the first is limiting parking between the building and Spring Forest. The second is requiring some principal building within a certain distance of the road. The third is about a pedestrian connection, and the fourth is relatively vague, but promising some extra outdoor amenity treatments that provided that they would be permitted at a site plan at Spring Forest Road. Next slide, please. The projected entitlement is basically the same between IX3 and CX3, so not a whole lot of use changes that would affect the office or retail or industrial potential development in either case. Next slide, please. Request is consistent with the future land use map, which is community mixed use, which would recommend the CX district, as is the request. Next slide, please. The request is inconsistent with the urban form map. Quite a number of urban form designations here. So full consistency would be the inclusion of some frontage. And so the conditions that exist, the conditions that were offered do mitigate some of those as related to Spring Forest. They are not a one-for-one replacement though, and none of them apply to Capitol Boulevard. So while they would create like a higher degree of public realm than a general use rezoning, not quite to the level of consistency with the urban format. Next slide, please. But consistent with the future land use map and the comprehensive plan overall. Next slide. Consistent with policies that talk about the type of development on these types of corridors. And next slide, the inconsistent policies are basically related to the urban form that is not quite in line with the comprehensive plan recommendation. There are no other issues, and again, your deadline is in April.
Thank you, Mr. Mabel. Next, we'll hear from Hayes Finley, representing the applicant. The applicant and all those in support have 10 minutes to speak.
Hi, good morning. This is Hayes Finley. I am an attorney with Fox Rothschild representing the applicant here, and Stan Wingo is also with us. He is our project manager. He's a director at McAdams. And I will just be really brief. You can go to the next slide. This, just to characterize this rezoning request, it arose from the applicant's desire to redevelop the gas station that's currently there and modernize it, make it a much more attractive gas station for this area. And in drawing up those plans, we hit a lot of snags with the frontage requirement, the parking limited frontage requirement. So this request is, the goal of the request is just to remove those parking limited frontage requirements. And the staff report does a thorough job of describing those problems that came up. They said, you know, because this is a corner lot, and also just given the size of the lot, it's each lot is less than an acre. The building would have to be really oddly shaped, or this is quoting from the staff report, so large that it may be difficult to meet parking requirements with the remaining land area. So just the combination of all of those issues with trying to comply with the frontage led us to request a rezoning simply to remove that. But we've also been willing to downzone it from an industrial mixed use to a commercial mixed use because we can still have a gas station there. This is really just going to, the intent is to redevelop the gas station. So it's currently a gas station. The plan is to remain a gas station. But just given the lot size and the location of this particular site, removing that parking limited frontage is necessary. And as the planner said, we've also proposed conditions to mitigate some of that and accommodate a little more pedestrian friendly access. But again, it is a gas station. And so it's really designed for cars to be moving through the lot. But we will have additional outdoor amenity areas, a little more access for pedestrians. In the site plan review process, there will be additional updates to the sidewalks and there's going to be landscaping and all that will be done at the site plan phase. But for now, we're just looking at the frontage requirements. Next, you can go to the next slide. You can skip a few more slides to the second to last slide. So here's just a picture again of the location. You can see all of the commercial uses around. Just looking at this map, I don't see any of those sites currently complying with the parking limited frontage. This was a layer that was added on by the city at some point, but the site does, just to be clear, the site doesn't currently comply with the parking limited frontage. And just given the lot size, it's very difficult to do so. So again, this is envisioning, long-term having Capitol Boulevard be a transit emphasis corridor. So, want to accommodate pedestrians coming, using that area. And we've done what we can to accommodate that and accomplish that. We just the way that the parking limited frontage is worded and designed, this lot is particularly difficult to comply with that. So we've done what we can. We've worked with staff, but at the end of the day, redevelopment of this site is really needed. It's kind of an outdated gas station, and it's going to be much prettier. There's going to be a better flow through the site. There's going to be better sidewalks, better landscaping. It's going to be an improvement on Capitol Boulevard, and we ask for your support.
Thank you. Mr. Moderator, are there any members of the public signed up to speak on this matter?
I do not have any.
Thank you. I'd now like to allow for questions and comments from commissioners. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Commissioner O'Haver?
I'd like to make a motion to recommend approval.
Go ahead, please.
I move to recommend approval of rezoning case Z6320. Rezoning request is reasonable and in the public interest and is supported by the specific policies in the comprehensive plan. Policy OU 1.2, future land use map and zoning consistency. Policy OU 4.9, corridor development. Policy OU 6.2, complementary land uses and urban vitality. And I'll leave it at that.
Commissioner Miller?
Second.
Excellent. We have a motion from Commissioner O'Haver and a second from Commissioner Miller. Is there any additional discussion on the merits of the motion or any other questions? Okay, seeing none, I will ask Chinitha for a roll call of members to record their individual votes. At the end of the roll call, I will announce the outcome of the vote.
Commissioner Bennett, how do you vote?
Aye.
Chair Fox?
Aye.
Commissioner Lampman?
Aye.
Commissioner Mann?
Aye.
Commissioner McIntosh?
Aye.
Commissioner Miller?
Aye.
Commissioner O'Haver?
Aye.
Commissioner Raines?
Aye.
And Commissioner Winters?
Aye.
Excellent. The motion passes unanimously. That concludes all of the discussion items on our agenda. Before I move forward with the approval of the minutes, looks like we need to correct a procedural issue on the vote from the consent agenda. Commissioner O'Haver?
Yes, I move to reconsider the vote on the consent agenda because I need to be recused on 2 of those items.
Okay, can you declare which of those 2 items you're recused from?
Yep. I'd like to be recused from voting on Z2720 Industrial Drive and Z5320 Lead Mine Road.
Okay, would you like to maintain your motion to approve all the consent agenda but for those 2?
If I can. then
Yes,
I
you
will.
can. Okay. Do we have a second to approve the items on the consent, but for those two items that Commissioner Haber mentioned? Commissioner McIntosh? Is that okay? Mr. York?
Yeah, I think you need to vote on the motion to reconsider the vote on the consent agenda.
I'd like to make a motion to reconsider the vote on the consent agenda. Do I have a second? Commissioner McIntosh?
Second.
Excellent. And can we do that by a show of hands, Mr. York? Okay, by show of hands, we have a motion on the table from myself and a second from Commissioner McIntosh to reconsider consent. And I see all hands up, so that passes unanimously. We have an alternate motion from Commissioner O'Haver to approve items on the consent agenda, but for Z2720 and Z5320. Do I have a second to approve items on the consent agenda, but for those two items? Commissioner Miller?
Second.
Okay. By show of hands, can we approve those items on the consent agenda, but for those two items? I see all hands. That passes unanimously. Now I would like to make a motion for Z2720, Z5320 on the consent agenda to be moved as described in the agenda. Do I have a second? Commissioner Lampman?
Second.
And by show of hands, other than Commissioner O'Haver, who is recused, do we have support for moving those two items, Z27 and Z53, onto future agendas? I see all hands. There we go. There's a unanimous vote. Okay, moving forward. Next would be the approval of the minutes. I would like to entertain a motion to approve the meeting minutes. Commissioner McIntosh.
I move to approve the meeting minutes for February 23rd, 2021 Virtual Planning Commission meeting.
Thank you. Do I have a second? Commissioner Bennett?
Second.
Excellent. And I believe we can do, nope, Chunitha, do we need to do a roll call of the votes for approval of the minutes?
I'm sorry, Mr. York says we don't have to.
No? Okay, by show of hands, approval of the minutes?
Do I, since I was not part of that meeting, do I not vote?
You can vote on it as well, Commissioner.
Oh, okay.
Okay, that motion passes unanimously. The minutes are approved. Next is a report of the chairperson and report of other members. Do any members have a report? We could do a quick introduction of our new commissioner, Commissioner Rains, as well. Commissioner Bennett, I saw your hand up first. Go ahead.
Thank you. I just want to announce that the Transportation Committee meeting was rescheduled to this Thursday, the 11th at 3 o'clock, immediately preceding the Committee of the Whole meeting. And if members cannot be present, I just ask that you please let me or staff know ahead of time so we can make sure we have quorum. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members? Commissioner Winters, Vice Chair Winters.
Also following Commissioner Bennett, with the rescheduled Committee of the Whole meeting will be this Thursday at 4. And likewise, if you're unable to attend, please let me or staff know so we know if we have quorum. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Commissioner O'Haver.
Commissioner Winters, I cannot make that Committee of the Whole meeting, unfortunately. But Commissioner Bennett, I will be at the transportation meeting.
Excellent, thank you for that. And I'd like to also take a minute, if we could welcome Commissioner Rains, who's sat through our first meeting here with us. If you'd like to just say a little 30-second, hi, here I am, or whatever else you'd like to say.
Thanks, Roberta. Yeah, I'm Dean Rains. I'm an architect. here in Raleigh at a company called LS3P. I formerly was on the Appearance Commission for 3 terms in the early 2010s. Transplanted here from Indianapolis, so I'm a Midwesterner, but I was born and officially raised in the South, Charleston, South Carolina, and I have a lot of family in both Carolinas. So I'm excited to be part of the commission and look forward to talking with you all in the near future.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Commissioner Rains. Next is the report of the Deputy Planning Director, Mr. Bowers.
Yes, hello. First, welcome to Commissioner Rains, and glad you were able to ease into it with a relatively light agenda compared to some recent Planning Commission agendas, but don't get used to it. I'm sure we'll be full up for the next meeting. We had a large Planning Commission report for the last council meeting, and a total of 6 items were referred to the public hearing on April 6th. They included almost all the zoning cases you heard, the street renaming of Acock Street to Roanoke Park Drive, which you forwarded with no recommendation, was scheduled a little bit further out. It's going to go to public hearing on May 4th. And then 2 items are still being held because sign conditions, revisions to the sign conditions are still pending, and they were C3420 on Lewisburg Road and C4520 on Buffalo New Hope. So those have yet to be scheduled for public hearing. And then you did ask for 2 time extensions for Z5320 on lead mine and for the floodplain regulation text change T1620, and you received both of those extensions. There's a couple of follow-up items also in this week's report. I'll just give a brief summary and you can read a little bit more about it, but you may remember that Ms. Morales spoke on Z4820, the Glover Street. She operated a supportive housing facility on the site and spoke about her difficulty in finding a location. Staff has reached out to her to provide some additional assistance. We have also looked to make sure that the IMAPS layers that she referenced that show where existing supportive housing is located and gives you the spacing buffers to let you know whether the site in consideration falls within it or not. We are making sure that that is quality controlled and is kept up to date. Apparently there has been some lapse in that regard. The last item was we have provided you with a little bit more detail about how staff goes about making our recommendation on consistency. And I call it a recommendation because I think it's important for the commission to remember that the statutes do not delegate staff the finding of consistency. Staff does a detailed analysis using a methodology that we have detailed here, but our consistency finding is a recommendation for your consideration. The commission by vote with your certified recommendation can differ from it if you believe the staff got it wrong. So that is always an option for the commission, but we wanted to give you a little bit more detail about how we go about on an internal level making these determinations. The comprehensive plan is a large and complex document. It has a lot of policies on it. There are judgment calls involved in these consistency determinations, which is why we try to have multiple layers of review and multiple sets of eyes on that, because obviously reasonable people could sometimes disagree when a case is borderline. But we hope that you find this information useful, and that concludes my report.
Commissioner Lampman?
Mr. Bowers, thank you so much for the clarification on Bloodworth and also updating the IMAPs. That was a huge change or correction. I also wanted to just ask, I think on the heels of what you were saying regarding the recommendation, how will the infill line item be documented for council when it eventually gets there?
It will go into the certified recommendation that the cited policy land use 8.10 is not part of your recommendation in terms of citing consistency. So we will note that in the certified recommendation that goes forward.
I think if I may, the only concern that I had, and I don't know if it's appropriate or not, is Commissioner Bennett's concern of setting a precedent. So if it is allowed up there, I'm wondering if there's a way we can force it down into an inconsistent policy. I don't know if we can or not.
I don't believe that was the motion, but you could take action to amend the motion and say such. I would like to bring up, we felt like it was a little bit too detailed in the middle of your recommendation, was that the inclusion of that particular policy was in fact a typo. We were trying to cite 8.12, which is another policy on infill compatibility, but it does not reference, it's not exclusive to vacant land. But at this point, I think it would be simplest, instead of all pulling out that policy list and trying to amend it again, is to either be satisfied that you have explicitly said that that policy is not part of your recommendation, or if you want to amend your action to specifically cite it as inconsistent, you could do so if the commission feels that that is appropriate.
If I may, I would feel more comfortable stating that it's an inconsistent policy.
Commissioner Miller?
It seems that that policy is more inapplicable to this project, as opposed to it being inconsistent with this project. This project being inconsistent with that policy. Is that what staff is indicating as well?
Well, I think your current motion that you have passed, that's the import of it, is that the policy is inapplicable. You're removing it from consideration in your motion as to a consistency determination. So if the intent is to say that it's inapplicable, then I believe that you have already done so. If the intent is to say that this specific thing is inconsistent with it, which is a different finding, that would be a finding that it is applicable to the review of this case, and that you find it inconsistent with it, that would be a different finding.
Commissioner Lampman?
I feel like it is applicable to this case, and I think it would be inconsistent. If I'm standing alone on this, then we can move on. I apologize.
Would you like to define its applicability to this particular case? Maybe that might help.
Let's see here.
I just wanted to express support for Commissioner Lampman's statement on this being inconsistent.
So I just want to say, I think that what I heard was it was inapplicable because the land was not vacant, and therefore the policy of encouraging infill development on vacant land wouldn't apply here because this land is occupied by structures. And so what I heard from your discussion, I think, was a general statement of inapplicability. But I'll rest it there. Obviously, it's
as an alternate, I might offer we could put this particular issue on a future agenda for strategic planning. Does that seem appropriate, Vice Chair Winters?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I don't think we need a show of hands or a vote on that, but I think we can move that issue. Perfect. Thank you for the thumbs up to a future agenda. Is there anything else for the good of the order? Seeing nothing else, I'd like to conclude this meeting of the Planning Commission at 11:20. Thank you.